In last week's video, we talked about the history of segregation and inequality in our country and why Black Lives Matter. So in today's video, I want to talk about what we could do, the applications. And before we get into that, I want to first talk about something else. And that something else is the idea of laws. You see, as followers of Jesus, we are called to follow two types of laws. The first one is called the law of Jesus, and the other one is called the laws of this land. So let me first talk about the laws of Jesus. So Jesus gave us one specific command that we're all supposed to follow if we were to be disciples of Jesus. And that's found in John 15, verses 12 through 13. The first part says this: "My command is this, love each other as I have loved you." Now, this is a very, very tall order because to love somebody, I'm sure we all know how to do that. But to love somebody in the way that Jesus has loved us is nearly impossible. It's the highest calling of love that you will ever have on your life. In case you don't know what it looks like to love like Jesus, just look at the cross. Or you could also look at the very next verse, which says this: "Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." Now, there's two things I want us to get from this verse. The first part is the level in which we're supposed to love somebody. According to this verse, it says that we're supposed to love somebody to the point of death. Now, if you paid attention to that verse, you'll probably say, wait a minute, is laying our lives down for our friends really the highest kind of love? I mean, what about laying our lives down for our enemies? But let's think about it for a second. Jesus says the highest level of love is to lay our lives down for our friends. And then a few chapters later, we see Jesus lay his life down on the cross. And he does it in the presence of the people that are mocking him, who are hurting him, people who are arresting him for no good reason. Which leads us to the second part that Jesus wants us to know, which is, who did Jesus lay his life down for? Did he lay down his life for his friends, or did he lay his life down for the people who are a threat to him? And the answer to these questions is yes. The way that Jesus defines friendship is a little different from the way we do. When we consider friends, it's a mutual thing. But for Jesus, he laid his life down for the people who are a threat to him, and he loved them so much that he would consider those people to be his friends. This is the level of love that Jesus is calling his followers to achieve. We're supposed to love people no matter how much of a threat the other person is to us. And so that is the law of Jesus, to love everybody in the way that Jesus loved us, and to befriend people even when they're a threat to us. And this law is so above us that it's impossible for us to manipulate it. Now, that brings us to the second kind of law, which is the law of this land. This is the law that we see in our context would be in California, in Los Angeles. We see it when we're driving, we see it on the TV, on the news, we see it everywhere around us. While we're under the law of Jesus, in many ways, we're above the law of this land. Now, if that confused you, don't worry, here's an illustration of that. Let's just say I'm a police officer and I'm driving down the road and I see a car that's speeding. So by law, I have the authority to pull you over. And after I pull you over, I'll walk up to your car window, I'll ask you to roll down the window, and I have the right to ask you for your ID. And after I ask for your ID, I have the authority to ask you a few questions. Now, that is according to the law of this land. Now, if I was a racist police officer, I would use the authority that the land has given me to threaten you, to ask you questions if you happen to be a race that I didn't like. I'm going to be fulfilling the motives I have inside of my heart. On the other hand, if I was a police officer that believed that the person who's in the car is an image of God, regardless of the race, as I walk up to your window and ask you to roll it down, I'm going to treat you with respect. I'm going to assume that you have a lot of value. You see, so while the law of the land gives me the authority to go to your window and ask you a few questions, it's my heart that determines how that law is acted out. And this isn't just a police officer thing. I mean, even religiously, I know a lot of Christians who use the Old Testament laws and take it out of context so that they could use it to fulfill their racist agendas. So this happens in almost every aspect of our lives. So here's the main point. The law of this land, no matter how many laws we pass, is pointless unless the person exercising that law is under the law of Jesus. You see, every law that's passed in this country, the city, the state, if it's lived out by the people who are under the law of Jesus, it will look completely different than a person who lives it out under the pretenses of racism. Imagine if the police officer who pulled you over, you knew right away, as soon as that police officer pulled you over, you knew that if a car were to drive really close to your car, that police officer would put his life in front of yours to make sure that you're safe. Imagine a lawmaker who's making a law that will help benefit your community more so than his own community. You see, this is the vision that Jesus had behind his commandment to us. So we should be praying for more people who are under the law of Jesus in politics and law enforcement and every part of our lives. Or maybe you feel the nudge to become a police officer. And then you're probably thinking, wait, Kotz, but wouldn't that take a very long time? I mean, I need a solution right now because there are people who are experiencing injustice in our world right now. I mean, doesn't that solution take a very long time? And the answer is, unfortunately, yes. It would take a long time. But it's also my experience that I realized that long-lasting solutions take a long time to establish. So the bigger question is this: what do we do between now and then? And the answer to that is found in John 15. We just read it a few minutes ago. It's to befriend those who threaten us. Now, you're probably saying, Kotz, don't worry. I have friends from both sides of the aisle. I have friends in both the police, and I also have friends that are of the minority race. Kotz, I've done that already. I'm sure you have. But I just want to remind you that proximity is not the same as friendship. Are you willing to lay your life down for these people that you call friends? Or at least the way that Jesus defined the word friends. And if not, we need to take action now. We have to reach out to them and befriend them, have meals with them, have a Netflix viewing party with them, go grab coffee with them, do whatever it takes to get close to them enough to say, yes, you are my friend and I'm willing to lay my life down for you. So in review, here's what we need to do as a community. We need to do whatever we can to get more people into these places of power in our society who are under the law of Jesus. People who are willing to love people to the point of death. That means if you are able to vote, you need to vote. If you have personal friends in these places of office, get to know them. Or maybe God is calling you to run for office or join the police force. Now, for those of you who are thinking like, oh, okay, Kotz, aren't you kind of blowing this out of proportion? Well, I don't think so. And I'll tell you why. Not too long ago, I got an email from one of you who asked me what Matthew chapter 10 verses 34 through 35 was all about. This is the part where Jesus says, do not suppose that I have come to bring peace to this earth. I did not come to bring peace, but a sword. And then he goes on to quote a passage from Micah chapter 7. For I have come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against his mother, and so on. Now, as I was helping this person understand what this verse is about, it really hit me and I realized this is exactly what we need to pay attention to right now. You see, Micah chapter 7 is in the context of God doing this huge movement. And in this movement, God basically looks at the people, his people, and says, you know, it's weird every time I try to move, I try to change something in this world that makes it one step closer to what I would deem as heaven on earth. There's always some people, my people, who basically turn their backs and split from the bigger group and says, no, I liked it the way it was before. You see, today there's churches who look at this movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, and they say, this is a movement of God. We need to do something. This is God shifting and moving so that the world is a little more like heaven on earth. And there's other people who say, no, that's not God moving. Now, it is my personal opinion that this is God moving. God is moving this world to reconcile our race differences just a little bit more. And so whenever there's a movement of God and his people are not there to embrace that movement, they usually get left behind. And this is why I think this is so important. And that's because as a pastor, it is my priority to make sure that whenever God moves, that our church moves with him. So brothers and sisters, let's all take that step with God. Let's all take that step in bringing more reconciliation here on this earth amongst the races. And by doing so, I believe we'll be all experiencing a little more heaven on earth together. God bless.